Welcome into the Autzen Audibles Podcast. I'm Matt Preem, Eric Scopel, Jared Mack on this edition of the show. It's a preview show. Oregon goes down to the Bay Area to Stanford Stadium, takes on Stanford Cardinal. 3:30 kick on the Pac-12 networks. I do believe this is the last game that Oregon has to be on the Pac-12 network. So maybe there's one more, maybe Cal, maybe we'll see. That feels also like a possible ESPN late night game. So if you don't have the Pac-12 networks, this might be your last chance to miss a game or have to go somewhere to watch it.
So sad.
So sad. 27.5-point favorite as of last night. This is a bigger spread than last week, which is a little strange because I think Stanford's probably on paper the better team. They have the better recruits than what Colorado's roster had, but games aren't played on paper. This game was also on the road, and Oregon's a bigger favorite than they were at home against Colorado. But it's a strange deal because this game used to mean a lot. It used to decide maybe the conference, and now it's just viewed as another game. We've talked about it off the air, guys. Like, there's no Deion and there's no Cinderella story of Colorado this week, but this game just doesn't have any juice at all. Dan called it a bring your own juice game because the environment is going to be totally different than any environment they've played in so far, and it's just different. It feels different. Is it a trap game? I don't know. Shouldn't be.
Well, to your point, it's strange to transition from a game that has all of the outside noise to a game where there is no outside noise. Like, I know Troy Taylor does press conferences, but has he ever said something at one of them that has been talked about nationally? I think the answer is no. Whereas Deion, anytime he does one, it's like one of ESPN's leading story. Whatever he talks, whatever the most important thing or the interesting thing Deion says is like in ESPN's top stories, like every Tuesday or Wednesday or whenever he does his press conferences. Troy Taylor not getting that kind of attention, and also two teams with new head coaches that have built their rosters completely differently. If we really want to go down that of like Colorado, when Adam Munzentegger was on last week, talked about how they had 70 new players. Well, Stanford has a lot of new players, but they're not through the portal because it's just been since this year that they've really adopted really any portal strategy and have kind of changed some of the restrictions that they could use to actually land kids. So programs in very different situations. I think I understood why Colorado's game was a little bit closer line just because they were ranked coming in and unbeaten, and USC beat Stanford 56-10. Stanford's not, I don't think, very good. But it's on the road, and to Matt's point, actually I think Dan Lanning said this yesterday on the football coaches show. The last two times Oregon has gone down to Stanford as a ranked team, they lost. So you got to at least keep your head up. You got to be aware. Last two times is a ranked team. This was Dan. You could correct me if I'm wrong. 2021 was the last two times he said 2021, and then I don't know before that, 2019.
It would have been 19, and they won.
Yeah, they won 21-6 though, but it was
were they ranked?
Ugly.
I assume they were ranked, but maybe Dan got his fact wrong.
Yeah, they were ranked.
Okay, well Dan needs to do a better job on I need to do a better job of fact checking Dan. Come on, Eric.
Yeah, you can't believe everything Dan says. They'll tell you that nobody's hurt.
True.
To kind of go, I didn't expect to go off that point of the ranked teams losing, but there's a hidden part of me that just kind of feels like this could be one of those games. I don't know what it is about going to Stanford, but Dan is correct. The last 5 Stanford trips, Oregon is 2-3. So maybe that's where he got his stat wrong, but they won in 2019. But what Matt was probably going to say, it wasn't really a great game. It was 21-6, and they jumped out to an early lead and then did absolutely nothing for the rest of the game. It felt like, but yeah, no, this Stanford team is less talented than Colorado. Colorado, Matt, I think they have the better recruits when you include Cormani McLean and Travis Hunter. I think Colorado is a much more talented team. I think the line is appropriate at this 27.5. And to what Eric said, California USC did beat the doors off of them 56-10. Like they just absolutely pounded them. It was at USC, which probably wasn't a very lively environment for a Stanford game, but that's the issue with Stanford. They're not going to bring a lively environment anywhere they go, including at home. And I expect there to be probably a similar amount of Oregon fans to Stanford fans. There's plenty of Oregon graduate and Oregon fans just in the Bay Area. So I think it will have some juice for the Ducks, but this is a potential letdown game. I really don't see it happening just because of the way Oregon is playing and the lack of complete talent on Stanford's roster this year. Like I said on our Tuesday podcast, next year they're going to be bringing in some talent in this next upcoming recruiting class, and maybe the transfer portal, and they'll look great in the ACC for some reason. But until then, this team is not great. They have 2 quarterbacks, which means they don't have one. And Oregon's defense will have to prepare for this, but you don't really see anything great from Stanford's defense. They're giving up they're giving up 6.4 yards per play. Obviously, it's a little inflated by Southern California with 9 yards per play. But even Arizona got 5.2. Sacramento State got 6.5. Like Hawaii put up a really good fight, scored 24 on them. So this shouldn't be a trap game at all, but it's going down to Stanford Stadium as a ranked team against unranked Stanford team. It's just kind of weird, and they've always had these weird battles when they go south to Stanford Stadium. But we'll get into the score predictions, but I don't think that this game should be close at all.
I looked it up. The blue chip team talent that we have, the rankings that we have on 24/7 Sports. Colorado is 35th in the country at 712 points. Stanford 37th at 710. They are essentially the same team.
Weird.
The only difference between these two is Stanford has no 5 stars. Colorado had 3. Stanford has 16 more 3-star players than Colorado. That's the only difference between these two teams. Colorado had the top end talent. Stanford theoretically has the better depth, I guess, but they're the exact same team. Really weird. As Jared said, really weird. And one in which I struggled with the line, guys. We'll get to our picks later, but I struggled with the line here because Oregon should win this. If they play this game to their standard, they should win this by 5 scores, more than that. But to Dan's point on Wednesday afternoon, they did not have a good practice on Tuesday, and we didn't see it, but he came out and said, "Now, do we believe him?" Like to Jared's point, can't believe everything he says, but do we believe him? I think it's certainly understandable if they had a bad practice. It's certainly understandable if they play sloppy in this game, and I guess the transition here, there's still some guys that won't play, and they've got to replace now Noah Whittington, with his injury and how that shakes out.
Yeah. I mean, Dan also said Wednesday was like a really great practice.
Yes.
And he was encouraged by the turnaround, which, and you get, I think Bennett Williams was even talking about a little bit on the coaches show on Wednesday night about Evan. I did the thing that I didn't want to do. That Evan just talked about all throughout that interview. Gosh, I'm mad at myself for that. Evan though brought up the fact that it can be challenging to transition from that emotionally taxing week against Colorado to the next week, and so the fact that maybe Tuesday's practice was not up to standard based upon what Dan said isn't like super surprising, but it's encouraging that Wednesday he said was like one of the better practices that they've had. So it's all coach speak when they talk about practices, because we get to watch 15 minutes of it, and it's hard for us to be like, oh, this is a great practice. They're stretching really hard. They're really stretching. They're going after it today on the stretch. So we're just kind of taking his word here, but it would make sense if there was a bit of an emotional up and down this week, just coming off of what last week was. And frankly, because like even you think about what Dan was talking about in his Monday press conference, like we were still addressing the previous win when status quo supposedly in that building is Sunday you can kind of celebrate the win, but boy, by Monday you're moving on. So you understand if there was a little bit of that to begin the week, and you're hoping that by the end of this week there's none of that. There's no hangover or hiccups or anything like that. To the point we were trying to get to here on injuries, there really isn't much different from what we were talking about on Tuesday's podcast in terms of availability with players. We should note Brian Addison and Camden Lewis both returned to practice on Wednesday. I thought that was encouraging. Addison looked like he didn't do the full contact drill, at least when I was watching. Maybe Jared can correct me if he did more when I wasn't, but it didn't seem like BA was doing much out there. But we also I don't know if that means too much. It's just information.
It was well, we didn't see anything on the Wednesday one. Like they went deep on special teams.
Yes.
So we didn't get to see
he was off to the side. He was off to the side on
an
the
inside
special
tap
teams thing. Yeah. So
right. So, but I don't recognize Addison if he does do anything on special teams other than catch punts, which happens every Tuesday, and he wasn't here on Tuesday. So I don't know. There's a bunch of guys who stand off to the side during special teams, so it's tough. But it was encouraging to see him nonetheless.
Physically at practice was encouraging. Justin Jacobs, Nashad Strother, it's kind of same old from what we were talking on Tuesday. They've done now. We've seen them log some full contact reps, which is encouraging. Will they travel? Will they be in Stanford? I would imagine they will because they were at the Texas Tech game. Will they dress and be available? I don't know. We'll see. That's really hard to guess. Dan and Jamal Hill both gave some really complimentary and I know Jared has the quotes. He wrote the story about Justin and what he can be when he is available. Obviously, we've been pushing how valuable of a player he can be, and it'll be exciting to see when that happens. But again, we don't know if that's this week or not. And then the big one is Noah Whittington, who obviously we were expecting to be out this week. We did not see him at either practice. And now the question is kind of what happens with in his absence. I think you feel really good about Bucky and Jordan. Both those guys. Bucky's a 1,000-yard rusher a year ago. Jordan ran for 5 touchdowns last year, has 6 touchdowns already this year, leads the conference. Jordan has really expanded his game, in my opinion, in terms of how he's been successful, and there should be a lot of enthusiasm for what he can do. The other question is, do they utilize a third guy? And that's something that Dan was kind of, and understandably so, didn't have a very direct answer for, but I think he said it'll take what it takes. And so if there's a player that steps up and is ready and can contribute and help, then yeah, they'll utilize one of those true freshmen. But if not, they might just be riding with the 2 hands they've got right now for the foreseeable future until Noah's back. We'll see. I think against Stanford, regardless of if they want to incorporate a third back based upon game script, there will be opportunity for both Jaden Lamar and Dante Dowdell.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I'd be surprised if they don't use 3 running backs, mostly because of the situation, but I also feel like they use 3 running backs a majority of the time. And I think we talked about this on Tuesday. It just kind of seems like that's how Oregon and Carlos Loughlin kind of want to be. I think we'll find out eventually against like Washington if they trust Dowdell or Lamar to carry the rock in a big moment. They did it at times last year. They also didn't at times last year. So I think that'll be an interesting one to see. Yeah, there's just not a lot here on the injury front, and there's also not a lot here on the injury front for Stanford. There's just not a lot of media attention that drives around Stanford. And so if there are injured players, there's not really anybody to report on it, and that's a problem. But I think regardless, this is like sort of injury related, sort of roster related. Like this will be the first game where Oregon has a limited travel roster. And I guess I asked Dan, it was a terrible question. It was poorly worded by me after I got thrown off with a little back and forth with somebody.
Yeah, it was that weird hiccup. It was the weirdest.
It was a weird hiccup in the scrum when you and somebody else talk at the same time, and then you look at each other and you're like, oh no, you go. And they're like, no, you go. Very strange. But they have a limited travel roster for the first time this year.
Yeah.
So I guess that's part of like this injury roster thing that I want to get to is just who makes it. Mm-hmm. We don't know. Dan said that they have created their roster, their travel roster. So good on them. But yeah, we don't know who's on it. We don't know what went into putting names on the list. I'm interested to see if Justin Jacobs travels or Nashad Strother travels, because at that point you can't just bring guys for fun. Like, and when they played Texas Tech, they brought Preston Alford, a Texas lad. They brought another couple of Texas guys just to bring them back to their home state and have them play, or not even play, have them watch the game. You can't really do that this time around if you're going down to Stanford. Like, these have to be I forgot what the limit is. I think is it 65? Is it 70?
It's one of those two. It's 65 or 70. I always forget. I'll try to figure it out right now.
I'm pretty sure it's 70.
Yeah. I was going to say, like, those 70 guys are either your most important players, or you're playing a very specific scheme where you're bringing more you're bringing more safeties, you're bringing more offensive linemen, whatever the case may be. So I'm interested to see that, and especially if Struther or Jacobs goes. But, and the other thing is it's the end of redshirt season. Like, if guys have played all 4 games, they're not going to play another one, and they're going to keep their red shirt, or they're going to play another one, and they're going to be a real freshman this year, like a real boy. So I have some good ideas on who's going to be those players, because they played in all 4 games and they played well in all 4 games. But that's just another roster management story that I'm looking forward to. I think it's nice that it happens during Stanford week, because there's hopefully not a lot of other things to pay attention to. And so you can really look at that hard, but we'll see. This is why the games are played.
It is 70, by the way.
70. There you go.
That was right.
I mean, Jared, is that like your one and only thing to watch for in this game? Who travels? Like, is that? I mean, I say that like half seriously, because I don't think any of us are expecting this game to be close. There's, maybe someone is. I don't know, but like, what can we glean from this?
I have some other things to watch, like how Oregon handles quarterback runs.
Yep,
sure. I think that's a reasonable question. Like, Stanford is going to run basically both of their quarterbacks. They're going to run one more than the other. A damn dog. And that was a problem against Texas Tech. Clearly, like, Tyler Shuck ran for over 100 yards, which is, whatever. It was 158-yard run, then 38 more yards of nothing. But I digress. It'll be interesting, because they have had problems with that. They had it against Portland State. Shedeur Sanders, he broke free sometimes, but that was more like a scramble where your defense isn't really going to do too much about it. But Stanford is going to have some design quarterback runs, and that was a problem against Texas Tech. I think Shuck, who's hurt and now is out for the year, so feel very bad for him, because that's now like multiple times.
3 straight years.
3 straight years. It's a sad day.
Yeah.
But Shuck he's a big boy. He's like 6'5". He can carry the rock, and he's a bit more hard to tackle. And Stanford's quarterbacks, they're not as big, but they're still bigger boys. Like, it's going to be an interesting defensive philosophy to see what Dan and Tosh and I guess Chris Hampton, what they kind of try to game plan and try here. Because that was a big question mark. I don't really think it's that big of a question mark, but Stanford's going to try it. And if they see something, like, that's going to be a long day at the office for Oregon's defense, because they're just going to try to exploit that every time. But we'll see.
That was my big thing too. In part because, again, watching the coaches show, when Evan Williams was on, he mentioned that they were expecting Stanford to run it with their quarterback a lot. I think he said like very, very often or something like that. So the expectation is that's the case. He also said that they're a game plan offense, which I know every offense obviously game plans, but his point was more like, some teams run their own stuff and that's just what they run. Other teams see what worked the previous weeks and then focus on those things. And that was sort of what he was getting at, was like, Stanford's going to be a team that goes and looks at the film and goes, Oregon hasn't defended, quarterback draws to the right very well this year. Oregon hasn't defended, I'm just making things up now, screen passes, tunnel screens to the left. If you get your left guard out there, they haven't been able to defend because whatever the tell may be, that's what Stanford's going to be looking at. And so that's, I think, maybe create some challenges a little bit of their kind of a copycat kind of offense. To the QB run part, Jared's right. These aren't as big of athletes, but both Ashton Daniels and Justin Lamson are both like 6'2", but 215, 220 pounds, at least on the roster. So well put together players. Daniels, I think, has a little bit more burst at least from what I've seen, a little bit more. But Lamson actually the last game ran it 13 times for I think about 60 yards. So they're committed to using both in the run game. I think Dan even said that when the offense doesn't really change when they're, regardless of who the quarterback is. These are bad passers though. And to me, like if statistically, like if you combine their numbers, they're basically like 50% completion percentage guys with 3 total touchdowns through 4 games through the air.
There's one outlier game, and it was against Hawaii.
Right.
That's it.
There's just not a good. I mean, even Sac State basically held them in check through the air passing. Like I think what was the total? The 200 yards.
207, 46% completion percentage rounding up.
Yeah, it was really tough. So, like this is a matchup that is favorable in a lot of ways, but if they're able to exploit some of the QB run stuff and change the way Oregon defends it, and then have some counters off of that, maybe that's where this could get kind of dicey. But like honestly, this feels like a game where Oregon, if they played the way they played against Colorado on the outside and they get the pass rush home a little bit, I just don't see Stanford doing a whole lot offensively at all.
Yeah, for me, I'm just looking at, I guess, do we describe this as like the maturity, the focus of this team? I think it's there. I think it's pretty good. Just what's that first quarter look like? Troy Taylor did an interview, Eric.
Good.
I have seen video of said interview. It's still through Zoom, which is crazy. But he was asked just kind of like about Oregon, and one thing he said was the first quarter, and that they just dominate that first quarter against their opponents. They score very quickly. Next thing you know, you're down 21, 28 points, and you have to completely alter your game plan because you're so far behind. Does something like that happen? This team is really good jumping out of the gate outside of that Texas Tech game, and they still scored 14 points in that first quarter, and it wasn't like their best performance at all. So I'm just curious how this team comes out in a very low-key, subdued environment against a bad team with a bye week on the horizon, and coming out of that bye week, maybe the biggest game of the year, maybe at Washington, revenge game. Where is this team's focus? We've seen them play sloppy at times. We've seen them make a lot of pre-snap penalties in games. Does that pop up here? Does Oregon come out and just end this game midway through the second quarter like they did this past weekend? I don't know. I don't know if it's going to be that quickly, but I would lean towards Oregon, playing good. But you kind of want to see it until you believe it.
And to the point that Jared made earlier, the last 2 times they've played down there, and again, Oregon has been the more talented team both times, it kind of sputtered to the finish line, and it cost him in the one game. And again, there was a lot of weird stuff there. I thought I guess Oregon's discipline wasn't very good. Some of the officiating felt like it was a little bit nitpicky in retrospect, or at least I remember feeling that way very much in the moment. It was bad, right?
Do you remember how the referee was terrible, but that was like the week from hell for Oregon, where Joe Moorhead had to go do emergency surgery, and then Bennett Williams fractured his fibula in Friday's walkthrough, and couldn't play, and he was having a great season. And then you had the refs who were not great, and just Anthony Brown did not have a great performance either. That was like the week from hell if you're Oregon.
Do you remember what happened on the first play of that game too? The opening kickoff.
Yeah,
Triquez Bridges got kicked out of the game for targeting.
And he was going to be utilized as the let's defend John Humphreys on the fade passes, and then John Humphreys caught a fade pass for a touchdown, to win the game. Yeah, no, and then I was going to bring up the 19 game, which you referenced earlier, which you inaccurately, where Oregon got up, I think 21-0 maybe, or 21, but final score was 21-6, but just didn't do anything in the second half. So, obviously these games are several years ago, so does it matter too much? Maybe not, but just the trend has been the last 2 times I've been down there, they've gotten out to leads that were good enough to win the game, and then in one instance just didn't finish the job. So
well, I mean, there's no one on this team. Maybe Popo was on this team. I can't remember. But in 2017, they went down there and they got absolutely throttled 49-7. So
Popo was on that team.
So literally the last 3 times they've been down to Stanford in 2021 and 2019 and now in 2017, all 3 results, even the win, the 21-6 win, you walk out of it feeling like that was shitty. That was not good. That was funky. There was things that were wrong. It was Oregon scored 14 points in the first half. They went in 2019, Eric. And then they scored a fourth quarter touchdown to go up and win 21-6.
Yeah. Well, and maybe that sort of speaks to Dan's comment about road trips, which I thought was really interesting about Jalen Hurts and how there are kind of 2 things you're looking at. You want to make sure you win the game first, and then you want to play to your standard. And if you don't do both, you come out feeling kind of disappointed. So obviously Oregon wants to get the win, but Dan's point was also we want to play to the standard we can play at. And no, to be honest, and he said it as well, when they met at Texas Tech, they won, but they didn't play to the standard. So this is a second opportunity on the road to hopefully improve upon that.
All right, let's take a quick break. Oh, go ahead, Jared.
This will be interesting. Yeah, it's a new era at Stanford. This is not going to be like it has been in years past when Oregon has gone down there. It's going to be a different offense. It's going to be a slightly different defense. Like, it's going to look different. It's going to feel different for Oregon fans who may have not watched a lot of Stanford this season. But, the curse down there, like the bad food or whatever's in the water, it's still there. So we'll see if Oregon comes to play. But I have a feeling they will. I think Dan's going to, he talked about it on Monday about not getting complacent and understanding that this needs to be a game where they go all out. So a first quarter hot start is important, but I think they get it because it's just not a talented Stanford team.
I asked someone at Oregon on Wednesday if they anticipated a big crowd of their fans traveling or the Bay Area showing up, and they were completely uncertain. They didn't know. They mentioned a lot of the big boosters that travel that can afford the fly planes and whatnot on their own down to games. They've come to the first 3 home games, or they're saying they're going to UW. So I'm curious. Just typically, this game is one in which there's a corner of the stadium that's just completely taken over by Oregon's fan base. Do we see that? Is it smaller than normal? This is also like the last time Oregon's playing at Stanford for the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
So maybe some Bay Area people go, this is our last chance to see him play in our hometown, unless we want to drive to Oregon. We'll see.
That's a good point.
Let's take a break, and we'll go back and dive into our predictions for this game. All right, welcome back to the Autzen Audibles Podcast. I had the updated standings. Let me pull it up here. I do not have it in front of me anymore.
You guys are winning still. You don't have to belabor it. We know. I've got 2 now.
Jared and I are now tied for first in the leaderboard, 5-11 for both of us. Jared went 0 for 4. I went 1 for 3 last week. Mm-hmm. Eric is still at third, but he did get a point. He was.
Oh, it was a good one.
He was 1-3 last week. It was
a good one, yeah.
Yes. And then game predictions, we have full separation now. I've gone 4-0 straight up, 3-0 against the spread. Eric is 4-0 straight up, 2-1 against the spread. And Jared's 4-0 straight up and 1-2 against the spread. All right. Offensive team predictions. Stanford's rush defense is slightly better than what Colorado is at this point in the season. The Buffs rank 125th nationally in yards per carry allowed, while Stanford ranks 88th. There's about 1 yard difference between the two schools, but neither number is very good. I think Stanford opened up against Hawaii this season. That skews their numbers just a little bit after we've seen what Hawaii has done. And so you take that game out, and their average skyrockets to 4.89 yards per carry. What does this mean? Even with Noah Whittington out, I think Oregon's going to have a big day. I am going to predict 250 or more rushing yards on the ground for Oregon's offense. I think this is going to be a good game. I don't know who it's going to come from. It might be Bucky, all of it. It might be Jordan James. might be split. Bo might be a factor in there. But probably what's going to happen is Oregon gets a huge lead. Those two running backs have good, solid days. And then Jaden Lamar and Dante Dowdell kind of combine rush for 75 yards or whatever and get the rest to get over 250.
I had Oregon over 200 on the ground. So now I'm going to try to pivot. I should note the previous high was 180 by USC. And that was just a game where USC did whatever they wanted offensively, obviously. I think they had like 56 points and 570 yards of offense or something stupid like that. Might have been more.
And USC wants to throw and not run as much as Oregon does.
Right. What would be a suitable pivot point here? I'm trying to think. I've done some fun ones. Also, on the way back, is Jared getting doubled? Are we doing the inverse, the snake draft, just to make it fair? Are we doing that again? All right.
I'd hope so.
Cool. That was the plan. I thought. Just checking. I'm trying to figure this out. What do I want to do here? Because Matt has kind of.
See, I had trouble with the team prediction as well. Yeah. I just didn't know because like the Southern California game like kind of skews the I guess the guesses. It's like, oh, Oregon's going to put up the most yards against Stanford this year. Oh wait, they have to put up 575 yards. Yeah. Good luck.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because, and I'm buying myself more time here. Like Josh, Matt, you're on mute, so you've got a point.
Oh yeah, I said do 200. That's fine. We can double up. They're different.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I feel weird now because okay. Yeah, I'll do it. I'll do 200 yards on the ground. What I was just gonna say was like I'll take this term from Josh Pate, the padlock stats. I think there are going to be a lot in this game. But because Oregon is so superior in so many of them, it's sort of, to Jared's point, hard to like find the one or two to pick. So, but I'll stick with my guns. I honestly was having a hard time trying to think of like I know they're not going to surpass the passing total that USC did, where like Caleb Williams had 280 yards, and then the backup, is it Moss, came in and had like 100. Had like 120. So like I don't think that's happening.
Yeah, 393 a total.
So I'll just stick with the ground game, I guess.
Yeah, I struggled with this. This was like blank for a long time before we started recording. I don't know. Like I might just bite the bullet and say that they put up the most yards against Stanford in this game at 570. It would have to be 574. I don't think that's going to happen. I just don't. And but I'll do it. So Oregon puts the most yards against Stanford so far this season at least 574 yards. So there you go. I don't feel good about that at all, but that's all I could, because it sounds weird if it's like Oregon's going to put up the second highest total against FBS schools against Stanford this year at over 450. Like that's a layup.
I think
Eric would start yelling at me.
I was gonna say, but maybe
you
we
idiot, do something strong.
Come on, be bold. Come on.
Yeah.
No, maybe we should incentivize the predictions we don't believe in by being an extra like point or something. No, we shouldn't do that. We should.
That's a lot. That's a lot of work, man.
Yeah,
I still have to do this stock report game, and I'm not looking forward to it.
What if you change it to Oregon surpasses their highest yard total that they had in a Pac-12 game last season, which was 446 at Washington State.
That was their highest total last year?
Or sorry, that was just passing yards. Excuse me.
I was going to say they had way more than that.
I was going to say that I didn't see.
Yeah, it sounded
624.
Yeah,
624 at Washington. That's even harder.
Yeah, let's make it more difficult.
That's 50 more yards.
I think you stick with it.
I'm good. I'm just gonna say that over 574 yards or 573 yards.
I got it. 516, 515 is what they did last year against Stanford.
There you go. That's not bad. I like that.
Fine. I'll do that. If you're gonna give me that one, I will do. They beat their record from Stanford last year at 516. So over 515.
Matt has basically made two predictions, by the way.
Yeah. Well, I'll take it. If you guys are gonna give me that, I'll do it. I promise.
Yeah,
I'll take the layup.
I think
moving on, we're gonna go to player of the game because now I'm in control because we're doing the snake draft thing. So offensive player of the game. I hope I took both of your picks. I've got Jordan James as my pick. I think that he's going to obviously his role is going to increase in with Noah Whittington going down here. And I think he takes advantage. I don't think Stanford's rush defense is great. They did well against Hawaii, but who didn't do well against Hawaii? Teams just, I mean, they played Sacramento State and Arizona. Like those guys aren't going to really run the ball well against any opponent. But USC, like Matt pointed out earlier, like they ran for 180 yards, like 6.5 carries. Oregon's going to want to run the ball more. So I got Jordan James over 85 yards and over a touchdown. I think that he and Bucky Irving are going to combine for a certain number, but I'm sure that might be one of your guys' prediction.
I did have a Jordan-related prediction. I was going to predict a new career high, which would have been 87 or more yards. Instead, I'm going to pivot to the hometown kid, and that's Troy Franklin. He's been money so far, and I'm going to predict he surpasses his career high in receiving yards for a game, which was 139 a year ago against Washington. So 140 or more. And I'll just keep it there. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to predict a touchdown, even though he scored one in 3 of the first 4 games. He had 8 for 126 and 2 a week ago.
I think it's reasonable for a touchdown.
Okay, should we throw a touchdown in? We'll make it bold. Yeah. We'll throw a touchdown in. Yeah, sure.
No. It'd be pretty impressive to have 140 yards receiving and no touchdowns.
Well, I was going to say he's now going to have like 200, and he's going to break the school receiving record and not score a touchdown. He's going to I think Dylan Mitchell had like 250 against Washington or Stanford. Stanford, yeah, it was one of those two. And and now Troy will do that without scoring. But yeah, I think Troy's the other player to me just to watch every week, frankly, because of how dynamic he's been and just the caliber. This is like unmatched receiver play through 4 weeks at Oregon. That should have been a stat we looked up. Is this the best 4-game start to start a season for an Oregon receiver? If it's not, I bet it's pretty close. 3 of the 4 games over 100. The other where he wasn't, I think it was like 83. Against Hawaii. He scored touchdowns in 3 out of the 4 games. I mean, he's, as we talked about earlier, he's on pace to break all sorts of records this year, and I think he continues it with another strong game. Again, very, very close to where he grew up.
Neither of you guys picked mine, so that's good. To answer your question, Eric, Dylan Mitchell would be the first guy that you would think maybe have as good of a start, but no, because he didn't really do anything the first 3 games of the season. It was that Stanford game when he had 14 catches for 239 that kind of set things off. Anyways, back to my pick. I think this game is going to be very similar in the way that Oregon game planned for Colorado. I think they have a clear advantage up front, the line of scrimmage, and I think they have a clear advantage of just overall team speed. So I think knowing that Stanford's pass defense isn't good, Oregon is the faster team, we're going to see Oregon's game plan limit the deep shots that they take down the field. They did a couple against Colorado, but Bo Nix really very rarely did he ever put the ball even in remote, this could be a potential opportunity for a pick because of how long the ball is going to be in the air. He did throw a pick, and it was one of their only few shots that they took. So I think we're going to see a lot of screens. We're going to see a lot of middle field throws, a lot of short stuff, which then opens the door for, I think, Tez Johnson. 3 straight games, excuse me. He's had 4 catches. He's also gone. He's averaging 42 yards a game this season. So I'm going Tez Johnson being a focal point in this offense for Oregon on Saturday. I'm going to say that streak of 4 extends to 4 games, and he's going to hit over, I'll say, 65 yards receiving in this one. 4 catches, 65 yards in this game. That feels number-wise like an easy one, but he's only gone over 50 once, and it was the Hawaii game when he had 4 catches for 77 yards and 2 touchdowns. It's borderline, but when Troy Franklin is being the focus and Tez doesn't get as much snaps as Gary Bryant, that's harder to hit. Then I think you look at the numbers equally and just say, "Wow, that's an easy one." Am I getting any kind of pushback?
I'll allow it. No, that's okay. Let's do it.
It's fine.
So Tez 4 for 65 or more was what the prediction
Yes.
was. All right.
Yes. So now it's mine again. Team defense.
Yeah.
3 different times the Ducks have held their opponent under 202 total yards of offense. I don't care that they've played some bad teams. That's pretty impressive to do, especially when you factor in the fourth quarter. Oregon's got like all freshmen out there on the field. That's pretty good. Stanford's offense is basically, from a yards per play perspective, the equal to Colorado's, which really surprised me. So I think that's a good matchup here. So I am saying Oregon will hold Stanford under 250 yards of total offense. I think 202 is hard to hit. So I'm going to go up to 250 because I do think some backups get in the game, some road situations play out, but 250 or fewer for Oregon's defense.
If they do that, or even if it's like, let's say they do get under 202 again, that's going to be the markings. And again, I know it's Stanford, but like that's going to be just more ammunition to say this defense is really, really good, because that kind of consistency. And again, Stanford is different than what they've been in the past, but they're also a little different than what Oregon has seen, especially against Hawaii and especially against Colorado. So a different approach there to be able to have so much success. I think that would be impressive. I'm going to go with disruption here on the defensive team prediction. And I'm predicting a third straight game with 7 or more tackles for loss, which is lofty. But that would be the first time since 2019 since an Oregon defense did that. And that was ironically to start conference play with Stanford, Cal, and Colorado. That year, by the way, that team surpassed 7 or more tackles for loss 7 times, I think, when I was looking at it, which is just crazy. This last year's team only did it once, and that was against Washington State. So I think this year's that's going to be, again, that's the markings of a team that's very disruptive and can create havoc plays, which is something that Dan is obviously very high on. I think this is going to be a game where you come away saying, not only did the defense do its job, I'm not going to predict what Matt predicted, but I don't disagree with the notion that they'll keep Stanford under a reasonable number of yards, but I also think they're going to cause some problems in the backfield. So I have 7 or more tackles for loss.
I got something that kind of goes along with that. I think they forced 3 or more turnovers, Oregon's defense, which would tie a brief but a season high for Stanford. They did that once against Southern California. They turned the ball over 3 times, 2 fumbles, 1 interception. I've got some bonus bets at the end of this in case you guys want to win free money, because they're going to hit. But one of them has to do with the interception mark. So just, stay tuned. The turnovers, I just think that Oregon's defense is going to capitalize. The one worry I have with this is I think Stanford's going to run the ball a lot. I don't think that they feel they probably don't feel overly confident against Oregon's secondary, and B, Oregon hasn't really been tested on the ground this year. A lot of teams that they've played have been this run and gun offense, and like I mentioned earlier, Tyler Shuck had that one long run, but had some success. Texas Tech had some success on the ground, but they just didn't run it because they couldn't. They needed to move the ball down the field at points. Obviously, Colorado is not a running team. Hawaii also not a running team. Like, I think that Stanford will test Oregon on the ground to begin the game. So some of these turnovers might have to be forced fumbles, but I've got 3 or more turnovers for Oregon's defense as my prediction. But I do like the tackle for loss prediction. I thought about doing something like that. Stanford's offensive line is not great, but I think that I don't know. I think that those will actually kind of go hand in hand, because the more that they get pressure, the more likely that it is a poor throw, maybe a fumble, a tip ball, something like that. So, alrighty. Defensive player of the game, Oregon Ducks, Evan Williams, not Bennett, Evan Williams.
Yep.
I have him at over 6.5 tackles. I think he might lead the team, either him or Taishim. And I have him at over a half sack. I think he's going to come screaming off the edge again. I rewatched the Colorado game a lot just to look at the defensive schemes from Oregon. Those were some fun schemes. Yep. And having Evan Williams as that weapon outside on the edge, I think Oregon, or Taishim Johnson on the other side, I think Oregon's going to take advantage of that a lot this year. And I think they take advantage of it again at Stanford, which is why I have the over a half sack. So I think he gets at least one sack. Also, like kind of like revenge game for Bennett to have his brother go out there at Stanford and perform when he couldn't. So I've got that family connection going there. Over 6.5 tackles, over a half tackle, or over a half sack. Excuse me.
It doesn't matter how we invert these predictions. People always just take the ones that I do because that was where I was going to go, Jared. I think it's a great pick. I like Evan a lot.
I know how it feels.
I know. Now I've got a feel for it. Well, it happened last week a couple times. Remember the start of the year, Matt and I were mind melded. I think we had
you guys had the same brain,
and it was just like, oh yeah. I also think Evan's going to have a big game. Just because I think game script wise, and because he's versatile. Like that was one of the things that stood out last week. It wasn't just pass protection or pass rush, but it was also like up and run support. Like he's around the ball all the time. I think he's really impressed me, especially the last couple of weeks with how he's played. So I think that's a good pick. Trying to think if sacks make sense in this game. I think so. I think it does. And I'm going to say Mateo. I'm going to make the Mateo pick. Again, I missed it a couple weeks ago. It was a different true freshman this past week with Tatum getting home. Mateo has not had his first sack. He's had a couple he had one that was wiped off, which I have mentioned before. And then he's had a couple where he's been held like pretty egregiously. Like I think called maybe once, but a couple of times like what are we doing here? Like he's so far upfield, guys are just grabbing at him. I think he gets home in this one. It's obviously he's a Southern California lad, so not exactly a homecoming, but I'd imagine his family will be even in more full force for this one just because it is a little closer to Los Angeles. So I like Mateo to have a big game and get his first career sack. I do think, obviously, with my TFL prediction a moment ago, that I think Oregon will be disrupted defensively, and I think Mateo is going to be a component of that. So sack number one for the True Fresh.
Bold. I like it. That leaves me with mine, which is still on the board, which I'm happy about. Jamal Hill. I think I was on his bandwagon. I think it was last year, maybe the year before that. I can't remember. But I was the leader of that bandwagon. I'm back on it now this week. Yeah. I think he's going to have a season high in tackles so far this season is 4, which came last week against Colorado. His career high is 11, which came week 1 last year against Georgia. I don't think that's going to happen. I'm not going to go that aggressive, but I do think Jamal Hill will have a new season high. So 5 tackles or more this season or in this game. I think he's going to be matched up against their tight end. I think he's going to be on the field because of their offense, the scheme that it plays. The factor here that could hurt me that is going to be a play is how quickly does this game get out of hand and does he play extended snaps? We've seen some interesting. I don't think he's going to lead the team in tackles. Maybe he does, but like we've seen some weird ones where like Connor Solely, or is it Solely? Yeah. He's led the team in tackles because it was a blowout very, very quickly, and he got on the field. Special teams, he's on there as well. So that's why I didn't go Jamal Hill leading the team in tackles because we could see him only play basically a version of a half before he gets pulled off because of protection. So Jamal Hill, 5 or more tackles in this game. I almost said Jamal Hill interception because he was really upset that he didn't get that one against Colorado, and he said he makes that play 9 out of 10 times, and that was the 10th time. But I like Jamal, but I was kind of you dropped multiple ones in the past too. So
that one was also like kind of sort of difficult just from the body, but like he could have had it.
It was, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, you guys ready for my bonus bets?
Yes.
Free money if you can find this on some gambling website somewhere. Oregon under 9.5 penalties. This is the game. This is it. This is the one where they have a good day at the office for penalties.
I like it. 9.5 is viewed as a good thing for Oregon football.
Yep. They've only done it
more.
Well, what I should have done is under. I'll do under 9. I'll bring the line down because they've only gone under 9 penalties this year once. So That was the very first game of the year where everybody's like, "Hey, they did really good on pre-snap penalties. Would you look at that?" And then everything went to the next week.
Shit.
Second free bet. I remember my bonus bet last week of Oregon having a turnover hit. So free money if you want it. Kyrie Jackson over a half interception. Mark it down.
Okay.
That'll be, what is that, 3 out of 4 games with him having an interception. So mark it down.
I will continue my bonus bet streak because I had one that hit last week as well. The 2-point conversion fail early, which happened, which I actually nailed like consecutive, like within a minute. I was really happy. I got Casey Kelly with the very first non-receiver wide receiver touchdown, receiving touchdown in 8 games, and then right after they went for 2, kind of a mess. Dan actually went into a lot of detail for why it didn't work, but that didn't work. So, but this week, first special teams touchdown of the season. I think there's going to be a
special teams touchdown.
Yeah, a punt return, perhaps, maybe a blocked punt. Dan did point out, and Kenyon Sadiq was the player who blocked a punt barely against Colorado that we haven't talked a lot about, but they've been pretty active with blocking. You think about like they had 2 last game. Ben Roberts blocked a PAT late, so there's the special teams seems like they're playing just a little bit better than. Not seems. I think they're pretty clearly playing just a little bit better, and some of the disruption I think will lead to some success here. So I'm going to say a special teams touchdown is a little bonus addition.
I didn't think of this ahead of time. Didn't know we were going to do this, but I do have one because of anger. Because I would have hit a pick last week, but Eric made me pick a player. I said one player of Oregon's front 7 would have 2 sacks in the game, and I was forced to pick. So
Jared also was. We both kind of comboed that. We both wanted you to at least name.
So I picked Dorless, and even in my I forgot to update it. I forgot to update the story of having to actually pick a player. And in there, I said it could be Dorless, could be Jordan Birch. So clearly, my mind was those 2 guys, and I picked Dorless on the camera, and
should have picked Birch.
Birch got 2. So I'm not gonna. Since this doesn't count, I'm going to say just someone on Oregon's team gets 2 sacks in this football game.
I'll allow it. I'm not gonna make
you better because it doesn't count.
Make you more bold than your predictions that don't even matter. But yeah.
All right. Game predictions here. Score picks. I've gone back and forth. I've thought on one hand that we rarely see blowouts from an Oregon perspective down in the Bay Area, down on the farm. The last one came in 2011. Darren Thomas was the quarterback. That was 12 years ago. That seems like 5 years ago, and yet it's over a decade now since Oregon has gone down to Stanford and won in blowout fashion. Every game has either been a blowout in Stanford's favor or it's been close. So, but at the same time, like the Stanford team isn't a shell. They aren't what Stanford was in 2019, in 2017, 15 or 13, and I've really struggled with that. So, I'm going with the idea that this game goes over the point total, which is 60.5, because I think Stanford maybe scores a couple scores early or they tack on some scores late. And then I'm also thinking Oregon covers, but it's not going to be like this 63-14 type performance that in theory could happen. I think Oregon plays a little sloppy, but finds their groove and they win 45-17.
We're very close on this. Just some data that I had. I'm predicting Oregon's biggest road win at Stanford since 94, and that was 55-21, and the biggest overall win since 2006, which was 48-10 at Autzen. So I think Oregon will win by more than 30 points. My score is very similar to Matt's. I've got 45-13. It's a little bit better defensive performance. I went back and forth a little bit here of like, could this be a shutout? Could this be a game where Stanford scores like no touchdowns and kicks a couple field goals? Just because of how high I am on this Oregon defense. But I think they'll get in there once. I think this will be a game that's pretty similar in a lot of ways to what we saw last week, where just Oregon overpowers Stanford on both sides of the football, especially at the line of scrimmage, which is weird to say because Stanford historically has been so good
Mhm.
at both lines of scrimmage, especially on the offensive line. You think about some of the NFL talent that they produce down there. For them to be kind of like one of the weaker offensive lines in the conference is just strange, but I think that's what'll bear out here. And I think Oregon's going to, as I said, cause a lot of problems, wreak a lot of havoc in the backfield defensively. And then I think on the offensive side, I do think they'll run the ball successfully. I think Bo will make the plays he needs to make. I don't know if this is going to be like a Bo Nix Heisman reel game where he has 350 yards and runs for a couple touchdowns or something. But I do think he'll be locked in and dialed in just because he's been so consistent since coming here. So Oregon wins comfortably by 32 and heads into the bye week feeling pretty good about itself. But after the bye week, things get real fast.
Real football. I also have a 32-point margin of victory for Oregon, 49-17. So just a little bit higher on Oregon. I haven't really picked them to beat the spread. That's why I'm 1-2. I think the only one it's kind of lucked into with the Texas Tech victory. I have been like, how do I describe it? I haven't been as high on the defense, even though I've been the highest person on the defense. Like I honestly, like among us three, I think I've been the highest since the start, and among other people I've talked to. But I still haven't given them enough credit in these score predictions. But I'm going to do it this week because I've been burned on it. Yeah, I just think that this is a completely different team than what we've seen the last couple of years down at Stanford, with Dan as a head coach, with the talent that they've accumulated with Bo Nix at the helm. I just don't think that this is going to be a letdown performance. I think that Stanford's going to score, and that's going to be fine, and it might look close for a little bit, but I think Oregon's offense is just too good here. Even without Noah Whittington, I think that they still have a great rushing attack. I think that Bo Nix can control the game with his arm. I don't think Stanford has anybody to match up along the perimeter with Tez, Troy Sean, or Gary Bryant Jr. There's not going to be a lot of just roster spots coming on this trip. So some starters are going to be playing all game long. And that only is going to help the potential chance of scoring more than 45 points if you're Oregon. But I'm excited to watch Oregon play down there. To Matt's question earlier, I think there's going to be a lot of Oregon fans there. And maybe I think there will be more Stanford fans, but you're not going to be able to tell that if you're watching on television. So I have both. I have Oregon covering in this one, 49-17.
Here's a question for you guys, because Jared is correct. He's high on the defense out of the three of us. So far this season, they've got 3 games with under 202 yards of total offense allowed by their opponent. The 2019 team has also done that. They had one under 250, excuse me. 1, 2, 3, 4. They had 4 games where they had under 250. When Jared was talking about how he was high on the defense, I started looking at this. I can't find another season dating back to 2009 in which another Oregon defense has had 3 or more in a season. They've done it a couple times twice, but Oregon, this defense this year looks like it's the only one outside of the 2019 defense to accomplish that feat of 250 or fewer yards 3 times in a single season, and they've done it 3 out of the first 4 games. I don't care who you play. That's good.
Yeah, no, it's a good stat.
Dan's only done it once last year. The defense last year only did it once, and it was Eastern Washington, 187.
This is this is why this year could be really strange. Is I think defensively, this is a really good defense. We talked about this on Tuesday, or no, it was on the mailbag show on Monday. But I think there are going to be games where they just have a hard time because there's some really good offenses in this conference.
Right.
So while
that's the thing.
Like I'm still very bullish on this group. I think they're really good. I think we'll be curious to see coming out of the bye how they're tested by the first 2 teams really, really high in quarterback play and potentially a third if Cam Rising is available. But like this defense can still be really freaking good and have games where they don't dominate because they've faced offenses that are dominant. So I think, but this is not one of those weeks. So this is a week where I do think Matt's under 250 could very much hit. They could get 4 out of the first 5, and then it might not happen hardly at all the rest of the season, just because they're facing offenses that are top 10 and all sorts of stats. Yeah. So
if you hold Washington under 400 yards, that's like
a huge win.
That's like, oh my God, you dominated.
If you hold Michael Penix under 400 yards, it's incredible.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's like the 2019 team. We've talked about that defense on the show before. They just didn't really play anybody who was a great offense. Like, not that I can remember. Like, Washington State with Mike Leach was probably the best offense they played, and now everybody's running that offense with better quarterbacks. No disrespect, Gardner Minshew, but better quarterbacks, better wide receivers. Like, the transfer portal has elevated the level of play of college football. And that's exactly what USC is doing. That's what Washington's doing. That's what Utah, for the most part, is doing. And that's what Washington State's doing. So, it'll really be interesting to see what that defense looks like against Washington. But going into it last year, that game against Washington at home, like, you knew that was going to be a struggle for Oregon's defense. There's with this defense this year, you feel like there could be a chance. You didn't feel like that last year. Like, you kind of knew that Oregon's defense last year was going to get roasted. They had to bend, not break. And this year, you feel like there could be a chance that maybe there's an interception. Maybe there's a couple of 3-and-outs, something like that. While last year's defense, you just didn't feel good about it. But all the transfer portal pieces, how you expected them to fit in this defense so far have. And I think that's really great for Dan. And I think it's a good evaluation of talent by their staff as well.
All right, I think that's going to do it for us here on this edition of the Autzen Audibles podcast. Next time you hear from us, it'll be Saturday evening from Stanford Stadium in some room in some part of the football stadium, breaking down what transpired on the field before us. All 3 of us will be there. We'll have full coverage of the game on DuckTerrtory.com. Highly encourage you guys to go check out DuckTerrtory.com. If you're not a subscriber, please consider subscribing. It's the most impactful way to help us continue making these shows every week like we do, and they'd be free for you guys to consume. So highly suggest you guys check out DuckTerrtory.com, and if you can, subscribe as well. Until the next one, you've been listening to the Autzen Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.